Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this early winter night. My name is Dodi Lagasic, and I'm the nuclear lead for Environment North, and I'm a member of We the Nuclear Free North. And the area that I concentrate on is transportation. All right, so we're going to begin kind of answering the 5 W's and the how to make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're dealing with. All right, now, so the first question to answer so that you have an understanding of what it is we're talking about here is what is high-level nuclear waste. And I wish I was about 10 feet tall so I could stand right up there and point to each part. But luckily I have circled the center of a nuclear reactor. Okay, so what we're talking about is what is found in the center of that circle, and those are those are nuclear fuel bundles. And the nuclear fuel bundle you can see up in the square, up to the upper right-hand corner. And that nuclear fuel bundle is made up of zircaloy tubes, and in those tubes are, they say ceramic-like solid pellets of uranium dioxide. Uranium dioxide is made up of uranium-238 and 235. Okay, so it's a lovely looking fuel bundle. All of those go into the middle, into the core of the reactor, and there they go through the nuclear fission process for 18 months. After the nuclear fission process, they do not look exactly like that. Sometimes the tubes are a little bent, and the pellets are no longer always solid. NWMO often says that because they're solid, they're easy to handle if there's an accident, and the suggestion is that radioactivity maybe isn't a big issue, but it is a really big issue, whether they're fractured or not. This is an example of used nuclear fuel pellets. And what you'll notice from this slide is that during the 18 months, during the nuclear fission process, the pellet goes through transformations in the reactor, and because it's extreme heat. Now you can read through there, but essentially what I'm trying to point out in this picture is that there is, at a macroscopic level, fractures. Okay, so these pellets, when they say that they're solid, they're not always solid, all right? Okay, so still with what we are talking about is, remember I said it's uranium-238 and 235 in those pellets, in the nuclear fuel bundle. Well, once they go through the fission process, then it's like Pandora's box. The fission process causes a number of other radionuclides to be created. And so we have at least 211 radionuclides in a nuclear fuel bundle, in a used nuclear fuel bundle. Not the new one, but in the used ones. And those are the nuclear fuel bundles that we're talking about being transported up here. And so at the very top of the list, if you want to just go to the very first one, okay, you'll notice I'm just going to fly through. There's tritium, and then there's another little triangle besides strontium. I won't go through 211 because we will be here until tomorrow, but I'm just going to highlight just a couple. Strontium, it's at the lower part there. It has a half-life, or it has a life of 30 years, but it's 30 to the 10th, so it's 300 years. And strontium is water-soluble. So if it comes from those fractured pellets into water, because let's say there's a truck accident or a rail derailment and it ends up in water for a period of time, then strontium, once it gets through water and gets consumed, then it's what goes into the bone, into bone tissue to cause bone cancers. Next slide. Okay, and the next one. Okay, and in this slide, there is the second triangle there is to cesium. And after the Chernobyl accident, a lot of you heard a lot of news about cesium. We had friends that live in Austria, and he said that because it was raining and cloudy, the cesium was transported from the Chernobyl disaster. It was transported across and into Austria, and then came down in rain, and it contaminated many areas. The cesium level is so high in some areas in Austria still that they can't consume wild mushrooms. They can't go after wild boar or any of those kinds of things. So cesium, like strontium, has a 30 to the 10th life, and so it lasts about 300 years, and that's 15 generations that will suffer the consequences of the Chernobyl disaster with cesium in the surrounding countries. So that's something we need to bear in mind. Okay, so uranium, there's different types of uranium, as you can see, different numbers, and plutonium. And some of these have lives that are like 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Okay, so it's really interesting if you want to do a bit of Googling. Just take a look at this. This chart is in the Environment North and in the Nuclear Free North site, and you can pick any of them and just go through some of them and get an idea of what it is that's being transported. Okay, next one, please. Okay, next. Okay, so where is it coming from? Okay, so to the far right, number 9 is Point Lepreau, New Brunswick. Number 7 and 8, that's Gentilly, numbers 1 and 2, both in Quebec. And those nuclear reactor sites hold about 7% of all of the high-level nuclear fuel bundles that would be transported to Northwestern Ontario if this is where it ends up going. To the far left is number 1, and number 1 represents white shell. And now they don't make up part of, they're being disassembled, and the high-level waste is going to be transferred over to Chalk River. So by the time it has to go to the Revel Lake site, then it's going to be part of that 93% coming from Southern Ontario. So from numbers 7, 8, and 9, I'll refer to it later, but that high-level waste will be transported using the basket transport packages, which carry 120 used nuclear fuel bundles on trucks. Okay, so number 1, as I said, all of that's going to Chalk River, and Chalk River is number 6. Okay, so if you have a look at number 6, that's Chalk River. Number 4 is Pickering. Number 5 is Darlington. Those are the two big reactor sites near Toronto, closest to Toronto. And then if you have a look down at number 3, that's the South Bruce site. Now, it's from the South Bruce site that 54% of all of the used fuel bundles will be coming, because it's a huge reactor site. It has many nuclear reactors. And right above that, you can't see it, but it should be in number 2, and that's the Douglas reactor site. So if you have a look then at 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 93% of the waste that is coming from Southern Ontario. Why? Because the reactors were producing nuclear-generated electricity for Southern Ontario for the past 50-some years, and it's that waste that they have been storing successfully on sites, and it's that waste that they want to transfer up here. In the meantime, during that 55-year period, we're up here using hydro, that's water-based, water-powered electricity, and we're using now solar, wind, biomass, and we're using coal before. So it is NIMBY for me to say not in my backyard, but it is very true that when we're talking about this waste, where it's coming from is most from Southern Ontario, 93%. Okay, so that's really important to remember. The second thing to remember is have a look at the chart on the left-hand side. And Point Lepreau is 2,500 kilometers away. So every single community along all of those kilometers, for all of those different places that are on that chart, every single community is at some point during a 50-year period at some risk. And if you don't believe that, ask the people in Lac-Mégantic, and places where there have been derailments and there have been horrific things happening. Accidents happen, and over a 50-year period, the possibility is there. All right, so note the distances. It's because of these distances that they should not be transporting the high-level waste. Okay, next, please. Okay, so we considered that, and we looked at, well, in Finland, and you hear a lot about Finland in the news lately, and in Sweden, they're developing a deep geological repository. So we looked at distances, and lo and behold, in Finland, if you look at their site selection process, they only considered a host community that was by a nuclear reactor site. Why? Because they would not have any problems with willingness. People are willing because they're working at the reactor site and they've accepted the consequences, or they've accepted that. And so those people that are going over on the 5th, to the 11th, all expenses paid, I hope, are going to notice that reactor site that they're going to is 5 kilometers away. That deep geological repository area that they're going to be looking at is just 5 kilometers away from the major nuclear reactor site in Finland. It's not 2,500 kilometers, or the average 1,600 or 1,700 from southern Ontario. Big difference. Okay, so I did a deputation last September, and I asked the city to consider the proximity principle, supporting that when we presented it to the Ontario Legislative Assembly, which we did. All of us went down to Southern Ontario, and we we were present when Lise Bourgeois, your MPP in this area, and Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party, and Saul Mamakwa, they each presented the proximity principle and all of the reasons, all the whereases why they wanted the Ontario government to consider adopting it, or they wanted OPG to look at it and consider adopting some form of it. I heard nothing all year. I approached council a number of times through City Hall, and it's just recently that we found out that they were going to say no to even discussing the proximity principle. Because they had approached NWMO. What they failed to realize is that they didn't approach the people that presented the proximity principle in the first place. So they did not follow due process. And so now, as of Monday, with all the emails and all of the calls going out, and many of you were probably involved in that, we had a big rally on Monday. Now council is going to consult. And so in doing that, they get a balanced look. Then they can make a decision, okay? But then they'll have seen both sides of the coin. All right, so that hasn't stopped. That's ongoing. So talk to your counselors if you want. Okay, next one, please. Okay, what does this have to do with the transportation? I can't do a presentation without bringing in this reference from their adaptive phase management documents, and I call it the option clause. It's a provision that they have continuously included in their APM since 2005. It's now 18 years later, and if you have a look at the APM for 2026, that's post the consent or not consent, they still have it in there. And this provision says that they could have, as an option, a temporary shallow repository or repositories at the central site if they feel it's needed. Okay, so I approached Lise Morton from NWMO, when we were talking with the Dryden group, and I said, I talked to her about that, and she said, look, we are not using that. We are not using that provision or that option clause. So I said, so what is it doing in there? Why do you have it in there since 2005? So I asked her, and she says, we're not going to use it. Okay, so I said, then pull it out. Put it down on paper. Say to the media that you're pulling it out. Okay, so nothing, and then the next APM comes out to 2026, and there it is. And you know yourselves that any contract that you sign that has a provision, an option clause in it, you better watch out. Because if this option clause is pulled, if the central site's up here, and if the clause is pulled, then they could start transferring, they could build a shallow repository, which would not be difficult to do. If you want to know what it looks like, NWMO has the pictures of it in 2005 Backgrounder. And they could pull the storage that they already have, the dry storage, and bring it up here, and they could put it into shallow repositories. Until, they say, until the deep geological repository is built. But what if the deep geological repository never gets approval and never gets built? So then we will be stuck with a shallow repository or repositories up here. And they will call that interim, temporary shallow. Okay, so watch out for that. That is a major red flag. Okay, so what does it have to do with transportation? It's just that we can't sit back on our laurels and think that this is not going to happen for another 40 years. It could happen 10, 15 years once the decision is made next fall. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so this is an example, a sample picture of a UFTP on a transport truck. Of course, it would be chained down and it would probably be covered as well. The UFTP and the BTP, the basket transport packages, which would be coming from out of province, will be transported. It would look like this in some fashion. Excuse me. Okay, so they keep telling us that they've done testing and certification, and Brené knows the difference between testing and certification, and she's going to get into that a little bit maybe later on, about the basket transport package, the UFTP, and what's called the superload, or the DSC, the dry storage container. So on the left, that's the one that you see in their mobile units. All right, and so it's considered to be infallible, just like the Titanic. Nothing is going to happen. You know, this can roll down the Canadian Shield and go into a bay on Lake Superior and be there for the hours and days it takes to get 14 rail cars of it out, and nothing will happen. That's not likely. Okay, the second drawing is of a superload. Now, a superload it contains 384 used fuel bundles. Okay, in the first one, the UFTP, that gets transported by truck. The second one, the superloads, they can be transported by truck, and I've got a paper I'm going to give out to you so that you can see that. It's in their preliminary transportation report. So they're called superloads. Okay, and so they've got under the Ignace area, meaning that they will go to Ignace. Some of these coming from South Bruce, because they don't have a rail system from South Bruce to connect. Some of these superloads will go on trucks and go to Goderich and then go on rail lines. Many of these superloads are going to go on rail lines, and we'll have a look at that in a little while, okay, when I talk about rail. Okay, and the third, and that, by the way, those are the big storage containers that are already in the reactor sites. They weigh 100 tons each. All right. The third package, as I told you, is the basket transportation package, and it carries 120 fuel bundles, and that would be coming from as far as Quebec and New Brunswick. Okay, next, please. Okay, so I shake my head every single time I look at these tests. These are the tests that they have performed on a UFTP to prove that it's credible. So you have to take time. I have some of that material here, and have a look at these tests to realize how ridiculous they are, because they do not suit, they're not real tests for Northwestern Ontario. Don't forget, our Canadian Shield and Lake Superior, and the thousands of square kilometers in Northwestern Ontario. Do you know that Northwestern Ontario has just 10,000 square kilometers less water than all of Lake Superior on the surface? Now, we have a huge amount of water in Northwestern Ontario. Okay, so anyway, so if you want to just skip to water, the immersion test. They have tested a UFTP in water 50 feet deep, and also 200 meters. But if you have a look at the length of time, how long is it? It's 8 hours. So I don't know about you, but NWMO said that they're going to send their own equipment out, you know, their crane and so on. If there's a train load that's down into one of the bays, I don't think that 8 hours is a good enough test. You know, if it's a truck, it's not. None of that is good enough. Okay, so let's go back up to the free drop test. The free drop test takes that UFT, that package container, and it drops it, 30 feet. It's a little taller than this building, than this part. You know, we're like, 3 stories high? So they drop it 3 stories. And what does it strike? It strikes just a small, it's not, what it strikes is in the puncture test. But anyways, it strikes a pad. And again, we don't think that really represents the real kind of fall that can happen with a used fuel package container. The puncture test is the same thing. Again, very weak. They say after the drop test, the same package is subjected to a 1 meter a free drop, 1 meter. Okay, onto a 15 centimeter or 6-inch diameter steel bar that's at least 8 inches long. Okay, so anyways, and the last one, the thermal test. I don't know if Lac-Mégantic would agree with this test. It says the same package was used to drop and puncture after the drop and puncture test was subjected to a fully engulfed fire. The fire had to reach 800 degrees. How long did it last? 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Lac-Mégantic was 3 days? 2-3 days? Ogama, is it? Ogama, another 2 days of fire. So this does not reflect the situations that can happen in Northwestern Ontario, nor in Southern Ontario. Okay, next, please. All right, so now this is in the preliminary transportation report that's come out in 2021. This shows you, and again, I have sheets because I want each of you to leave with one of these sheets. The information that's often given to us through NWMO is not clear. In this one, they have two transportation ideas. So the main transportation idea for years has always been the one on the left. That's their reference case, where they would send all of the waste up here, 2 to 3 transport trucks per day over a 50-year period. Now we hear, Kristen Oliver was told by NWMO that, no, we're not transporting in the wintertime. Okay, so then that 2 to 3 per day becomes what during the spring, summer, and fall? Does it become 3? Does it become 4 coming through the Trans-Canada Highway? The second transportation option is by road and by rail. This is their alternative. And so if you have a look at the Ignace area column, what they'll do then is using the basket transportation packages, that's for Quebec and for New Brunswick, they would use the trucks. Okay, that's fine. And then look at the second one. They say 165 dry storage containers. Those are those big 100-ton containers that are in the reactor plants now. 165 of those per year. And that's the number of times. Okay, and it would be 1 package per truck. Now, does that mean 165 superload trucks are going to be coming up through the Ignace area. Does that mean that it's only trucks that will take a superload from South Bruce to Goderich and then move it up by rail? It's so open, it's so unclear that it could be either. But I suspect that superloads could be transported up through this area. That's what they're saying there. In the last part, it says 22 dry storage containers. That's per year. And what that means is going through the marina, going through Syndicate Avenue, through West Fort, going by Fort William First Nations, will be one train every 2.5 weeks or so to make up 22 per year. And that one train will contain 14 rail cars. And each of those rail cars will have on it one dry storage container. So 14 rail cars times, what was it, 330 some used fuel bundles, works out to something like one train carrying a load of over 5,000 used fuel bundles. Will there ever be a derailment? There are derailments we don't hear about. You know, CPCN have their own policing. So if it hits the media, we will hear about it. To what degree, what will happen due to those derailments, we may never know for some of them. But we'll hear about the big one. We'll hear about the big one where the train goes down at Wawa or White River and goes down that Canadian Shield and then lands in a bay and is sitting there for a number of days. Okay, so it will be 22 trains per year. So how many years? They talk about 40 years, 50 years, maybe even more. Okay, but they've never talked less than 40 years. Okay, next please. Okay, so this is what it looks. We sit here in Thunder Bay. We love our marina. We love all of the waterfront. You know, we are a port city. And look at the transportation route. Okay? If you live anywhere near that transportation route, be it on the highway 1117 coming through in the yellow, or along the CP or CN rail line, check your house insurance policies. I've phoned around, mine is intact. They have a clause that says that you're not going to be covered for any nuclear accident. So keep that in mind. So if there is, and you have to make a claim, and it has to go through NWMO, it will take a long time to get any kind of compensation for your contaminated land. If you're a farmer and you have a lot of acreage, then heaven help you. Okay, so I guess there is probably some insurance that you could pay a lot of money to make sure that you're covered, but that would be expensive. Now the city, they need to look into this. Okay, they need to know what's happening, what's going to happen if the city incurs costs down through the marina or along the rail yards that come right through our city. Okay, next please. Okay, ice jacking. This one is on the left. That's a picture from the Emo area. And ice jacking occurs in the winter time, you know, where you have a road crossing a rail track. And so when the plow comes and ice and snow is deposited under the rail ties over and over again, and there's melts, and then it's icy, and then it melts again and gets icy again, it can cause the rail line to lift. And that's called ice jacking. And that is very, very hard to find or predict. And that is happening more and more due to climate change. On the right-hand side is sun kinking. Okay, you bring temperatures up close to 40, which we're getting due to climate change as well. This bending of the rail ties happens, and they cannot predict that. The number of sun kinking derailments that's been happening in the States especially is on a climb every year. Those are just two examples of forms of derailments that we need to think about when you listen to find out the causes of derailments. Okay, next, please. Okay, this map shows you the route coming from southern Ontario. The thing to notice is that if it comes through the southern route, then it's going to come right along the Great Lakes water system, right through all kinds of Indigenous First Nations communities, and then up from Thunder Bay to the Ignace area, past Ignace. It's not Ignace. It's 44 kilometers from Ignace, almost equidistant to Dryden. Okay, this shows you, again, we've got these cards on the side here for you to have a look at and take. And this shows you all of the Indigenous communities that are along the route. And they've already said no. But NWMO has extended the year so that they can convince some of them to say yes. Okay. Next. Okay, so there's not too many more slides left on my part. Okay, I've been collecting MTO stats for the past, it's going on, it's well over 10 years now, through Freedom of Information. And so what I want you to notice is that this shows you totals of truck collisions, and then it shows you totals of all collisions. And then the right-hand column, which is the one to look at, shows you the percentage of truck collisions compared to all collisions. And the area to look at, I guess, notice that all collisions is huge numbers, and the transport truck collisions are in the 3,000 bracket. So if we say yes, allow them to say yes in Northwestern Ontario, all of these people that are along this route, then this is just a sample from Pickering to the Ignace area. If we say yes, if the consent comes up here, all those people that are along this route, all the way from just Pickering as an example, are going to be put at some risk. All right, so the most important one for us is to have a look at the end of the overlap of Highway 1117 going to the East Street in Ignace. I've got a more recent one that brings you past Ignace and to Manitoba. But during, and you'll notice there that the percentages on the right side, they just keep climbing and climbing. And you know, we all know, we hear it all the time, that there are transport truck accidents around Sistinen's Corners. It's a deadly corner. Something has to be done about it. But now we're into the 66th percentile of all accidents are transport truck accidents. Okay, next please. This is just from Chappaqua to Ignace. It was at 66% in 2019. Okay, now, and then you notice there's a drop. There's a drop down to 54%. Why? Because of COVID. 50% of the vehicular accidents or collisions were reduced by 50% during the 2 COVID years. And that's reflected here. But notice that it's 54%, and then it went up to 57% on the other slide, and it's up into the 66% area now again. Okay, so there was just a temporary reprieve, but it's not going down anymore. Okay, next, please. This is the last slide. It's just a line, a quotation from Dr. Gordon Edwards. And I consider us the small group of people in a way, you know, not us making the decision, because we don't get to make the decision. No one along the transportation route gets to make the decision except Ignace and Wabigoon. And that's wrong. Okay, so he says, do I want to be one of a small handful of people who decided for the first time in Canadian history that it's perfectly good practice to abandon long-lived human-made radioactive waste materials? What he's referring to is the fact that if it does come up through, does go into a DGR, it's going to be there for hundreds of thousands of years. So do we want to be a part of that? Do I truly believe that our present knowledge of science, technology, and nature is sufficient for me to be certain that the validity of this course of action for the next 100,000 or 1 million years. In other words, if we accept the transportation of the high-level waste up and it gets into a deep geological repository or into the shallow repositories, we have to accept that that's going to have an impact at some time. You know, do we sit back and say, you know, the scientists or the science that NWMO is using is infallible? We need to question that. Okay, anyways, it's long and you're very patient. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask, does Thunder Bay have an emergency plan if there's catastrophe?
Yeah, I spoke with Ulf Stammer along with Vince Ponca not that long ago, a few months ago, and asked that question. And he said, look, he said the emergency response teams are always changing. So it's not going to be their responsibility. I mean, they will provide information, but it will be the responsibility of who's ever in charge of the emergency response teams to train them to be able to handle an accident.